What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas here live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Once again, the first time in a long time that I can say that I'm actually talking about another franchise in the city of Buffalo, the Buffalo Sabres. I miss chatting about the Buffalo Sabres, and there's definitely a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about with the Sabres, and my guest that is joining me on the show has a lot to talk about as well. His name is Tom Wujek. Tom, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, not too much. Glad to be on. And how's everything with you?
Things are going good. I'm really feeling a little bit of a resurgence in Buffalo. Would you say so?
Absolutely. I mean, especially after this past weekend and especially after drafting Rasmus Dahlin and everything that we did during the draft. I mean, there's a lot to look forward to this hockey season.
Right. As far as we'll get right to it, what people want us to kind of talk about. As far as Rasmus Dahlin, what was you might have, we obviously have we've known about him for a few years now. They've talked about him in Sweden, and he's a global, hockey star. What are some of the things that you have picked up on in his game that when you first heard his name, you looked up Rasmus Dahlin? What were some of the first few things that you noticed with your own eyes in terms of his game?
Well, there's several things actually that stand out. The first thing that really sticks out is his ability to control the puck and his ability to control the blue line. Now, he's not just your average stay-at-home defenseman. He is somebody that will actually jump up into the play, and he's someone that can actually create a lot of good chances offensively. And that actually really fits in well with the system that Bill Housley has been trying to introduce ever since he was named the head coach last year. The other things I really love about him is that he has speed. He has a very good sense of where everything is developing on the ice. And quite honestly, I mean, everything that he has been able to do so far, his dominance, especially in junior tournaments, especially with what happens coming up with the 2018 World Juniors and everything. I mean, this kid's going to be special, and there's no doubt that all the hype is real.
Right. And it's tough too, because people say, oh, there's Dahlin hype, but I think of hype as something that is kind of not realistic. But as you say, the hype is real talk. It's not just hyping somebody up. It's actually, he has shown time and time again that his talent is 100% authentic. I've never seen a defenseman that young. Essentially, he's still a kid. I've never seen a player make the moves that he has been able to make in games. Whether it's transitioning from one end of the ice to the other or getting the puck on the fly. He's a very physically gifted player, but I think his greatest asset is his hockey smarts. His ability to know when the puck is coming or know when the opening is there to pass it. What do you think he will do for a player like Jack Eichel as far as being if he is on the first line, which I'm assuming he's going to be? What do you think he will do, for a player like Jack Eichel?
I would say for someone like Eichel, especially if Dahlin is going to be in the first line, and you figure if he's going to be in the first pairing with Rasmus Ristolainen, it's going to be a huge help to Jack Eichel, because the biggest problem that we've had the last few years, and this is actually going back to even when Darcy Regier was still here and when Tim Murray was still here, they really didn't have that defensive support, especially the last 3 to 5 seasons. A lot of the problems we've run into is the fact that we cannot keep the puck out of our own end. And that's one of the things, obviously, if you have the puck in your own end and it stays in your own end,
right, you're
not going to be winning games. So by being able to control that portion of the ice and having someone that can play that 200-foot ice, playing that true two-way game, I think really only helps Eichel, because now you're going to have someone that can actually jump into the play, get Eichel involved into the play, and be able to set up many scoring opportunities. So I think it's really going to be a huge asset to him. I definitely don't see it as a drawback.
Just as much as he's going to help the team, defensively, being that he's obviously a defenseman, he's going to help the team offensively. I see him as a two-way defenseman. Would you agree with that?
I would completely agree agree with
Yeah.
that. I mean, and everything that he's done over in Sweden and in the World Juniors, and I mean, you could even look on YouTube with all the different clips that are out there, just seeing how he's dominating older competition, and he's able to really get into that play and make things happen. I mean, it's going to be a real game changer for us, and I would even vouch to say that him coming here, I know a lot of people wanted Connor McDavid when that draft came up a few years ago,
Right.
but this, I would say, is going to be just as big is what would have happened if McDavid would have been here. So,
wow, yeah,
it's really good to see.
Yeah, and definitely, it's tough because the past few episodes of the podcast, I've talked, leading up to the draft and what I hope the Sabres will do, and what obviously, I kind of wanted them to do a little bit more on night one of the draft than just get Rasmus Dahlin. I'm one of those guys that I like seeing trades. I like seeing my team make trades. Obviously, I'm just that's just how I'm crafted, I guess. I like to see my team make more moves than just the one that I know that they're already going to make. But I can't be pessimistic about the fact that the last few years they have Reinhart, who has had his own struggles, no doubt about that. But I think that there's light at the end of the tunnel for him. They have Jack Eichel, who's a franchise guy. They have Casey Middlestat, who I was elated when they picked him. They have Nylander, who has crept his way up, the minor league ladder. I'm not really sure. You'll be able to fill me in a little bit better on that as far as where he is at. But to make a long story short, they have so much young talent that the future is sustainable for the Sabres. I feel like in past, decades or past years of success for the Sabres, the success was only in a really short window of time, where when the Sabres, quote unquote, get good, it will be for a long period of time because all these guys are very young and they'll be brought up through the system.
I would absolutely agree with that. And to touch on your point with Alex Nylander, now I would say this is going to be an important offseason for him because a lot of his development so far really has not been at the pace of what we should really expect it to be. And one of the things I can even point out to is that when he was down in Rochester, one of the big stats that actually stands out is that he has a minus 24 rating for the season. So
wow.
He hasn't done a whole lot in terms of the overall offensive production that we should expect. But at the same time, he has started to come along the ladder a little bit. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that ended up happening is that he ended up coming back in the last part of the season. He scored 26 points in 48 games, and he was actually able to get at least one goal every 9 games. So he's not absolutely the worst on the air rush right now. That's definitely not the case. Mm-hmm. But he does have some work he needs to do, especially if he's going to be at the level that his brother William Nylander has been at with the Maple Leafs, or eventually to reach the level that his father Michael Nylander was when he was in the league.
Right.
So he does have some work to do, but I mean, I don't see it as an absolute loss by any means. Just as long as he can commit to it and he has that good work ethic going forward, I think that there's a very good possibility maybe next year or two, you may see him up here on the big club. But don't be surprised if you do see him for call-ups this year, though, either, because he did earn some time up here towards the end of this past season.
And that's another thing, too. Like, I've talked with other guests that I've had on the show in regards to the Sabres, and my thing is, as much as people want to see them win now, and in some ways them winning now would be them maybe getting a veteran or two, I don't want them to go after many veterans, to be quite honest with you, because I don't see them in the long-term vision of the team. It's almost as if it's almost a waste watching a veteran that isn't going to be around that long. If you catch my drift with that, like the vision of the team is so long-term that if they bring in a veteran, it'll only really be sustainable for maybe 2, maybe 3 years.
Right, and a lot of the other things you have to remember with that too is that we already did try a lot of stocking the team with the veterans when Tim Murray was here, and
right.
We did have several veterans up here, and unfortunately, many of them did not pan out, and a lot of them are no longer on the roster. Mm-hmm. And the thing that you have to watch with veterans in a lot of cases, especially with the young team that we have right now, is that they are good to an extent. I mean, you definitely do need to have some veteran leadership, but at the same time, I would rather take that longer-term view into the future and focus on the proper development of our players, such as Middlestat, such as Darlene, such as some of the other players that we ended up drafting, such as Matthias Samuelson, which he's another person I'll go into in a little bit.
Right.
But I would really want to focus on building through that draft and making sure that we have the players developed properly. Let's say give them 2 or 3 years down in Rochester, maybe even 4 years if it's needed.
Right.
But that's one of the things that tends to work best, especially when you have your perennial teams that are going for the Cup or deep into the playoffs every single season. And that's something that Botterill has had a lot of experience with, especially with Scranton Wilkes-Barre, and it's proven to be successful.
Mm-hmm. As far as them building this team through the minor leagues, that's essentially how teams are supposed to be built, whether it's in baseball or hockey. Both of those sports can attest to that. I mean, 5-6 years ago, if I were to, kind of change gears here, the Houston Astros were one of the worst teams I've ever watched in baseball. And now they are probably one of the best teams of all time in recent memory. And the same for hockey. Pittsburgh was really, really bad for a stretch of time, and they got good very, very quick. Not once, but twice, dating back to Lemieux and now Crosby and all that. In the long-term view of the Sabres, would you say that this team, quote unquote, maybe, I wouldn't say has to be built through the minor leagues in order to be successful, but in a way, do you think it does have to be built through the minor leagues in order for it to be what they envision?
I would think that it's probably going to be a big key to success, to really build through the draft and build through the minor leagues. I mean, when you have someone that's going to Cincinnati, which is our ECHL team, or let's say you have someone going into Rochester, our AHL team, it's very important that they really buckle down and they understand the system, because the three teams, they do play very similar systems, and that's actually a great thing because there's only very minor differences between them. But when you have someone come in entry level and you get them that experience, let's say you give them those few years on the roster, it really allows them to adjust to the pro game, and it really allows them to make that step forward. The biggest thing I wouldn't want to see is a repeat of what happened when we had Mikhail Grigorenko on this rookie year, where essentially we threw him right into the Lions' den. And then what ended up happening is we ended up burning a year off his entry-level contract, and then he ended up not being up here anyways, and he's not even in the NHL anymore.
Right.
I don't want to see a repeat of that, but it's definitely important to build through the draft, build through the minor leagues, and then, of course, supplement with your veterans as needed to provide that additional leadership and that experience.
Right. As far as some of the veterans that are still on the team, Bogosian, I believe Josh Georges is still on the team, if I'm not mistaken. He's still on the team, right?
Yeah, there hasn't been anything with his contract as of late, but whether he'll stay here long term is yet to be determined.
Right.
And then with Bogosian, I would not be surprised to see him possibly be let go at the end of his contract, because right now, the issue I see with him is that he can be a very good role player and he can do a good job on the defense, but when you're injured half the season,
he's never available.
That he's been up here and he's not available,
right?
Especially when we're paying him the amount of money that we are on the salary cap. At that point, I have to wonder: does it really make sense to keep him here, or should we go after another veteran defenseman to help bolster that lineup? So I could possibly see Bogosian walking away at the end of his contract, but I would definitely not do a buyout as of this point, because then, of course, we're stuck with double term, and then it can hamstring us a little bit on the cap.
One of the guys within the last few weeks that last few months since the Sabres season ended, that I've really kind of, I wouldn't say chastised, but I would say have gone after or have really blasted on this podcast is Ryan O'Reilly. I took huge, I did not enjoy one bit. It really aggravated me. On quote unquote locker cleanout day, that the team's cleaning their locker. It's a very unsuccessful season. It was a miserable season, to say the least. Locker cleanout day, he's talking to the media, and he says that he is, quote unquote, throughout moments of the season, had fallen out of love for the game of hockey. I'm paraphrasing a little bit there, but to the tune, that was what his statement was that he has fallen out of love with the game of hockey at some stretches of the season. For a player to put out that quote to the media verbally and in front of everybody on locker cleanout day, a player that, as you mentioned with Bogosian, Ryan O'Reilly's getting paid a pretty penny. He's been in the league for quite a while. I would say he's one of those guys that I'd categorize as like a young veteran. He got in the league around 18, 19, and now he's in his mid to late 20s, and he's still in the NHL, obviously. What were your thoughts on that? And do you think that it is reasonable for the Buffalo Sabres to keep him on?
Well, I would definitely say this, and that is that we actually caught a lot of flack on the Buffalo Sabres Blue and Gold Mafia Facebook page as well, because, I mean, and even our Sabres Talk 365 channel that we have, where we do a lot of podcasts about it, we took a lot of flack about our viewpoint on it as well, which is basically the same as yours.
Right.
I can definitely say that I really did not like those comments by O'Reilly, and especially for someone that is supposed to be one of the team leaders, and especially for someone that wants that captaincy on his sweater, to come out and say that he lost his love and passion for the game. How is that a good example for the younger players that are on this team?
Right.
And I look at it as really saying, okay, let's accept mediocrity and let's just not play our butts off to really get to that bigger picture. So I was really not impressed with that, and quite honestly, I mean, if that's the way that it is, okay, I understand we've lost a lot of games the last several years, but if you're going to be that leader on the team, you need to step up and you need to set that example for.
It's up to him to change it. Yeah, like my thing is it's up to him to change that, to change that's why he was brought in. He was brought in, and I really thought of this recently. I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, but was he not brought in the same year that they drafted Jack Eichel?
He was brought in the same year.
So it's like, to me, that was what that regime was trying to do. They were saying, well, we're going to get Jack Eichel. We know that. We're going to end up with Eichel or McDavid. We're going to bring in Ryan O'Reilly to maybe show him the ropes of the league. And I don't think his example has been for the better, or the betterment, I should say, of the entire team.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. I mean, when you have someone that came in and says that, I mean, that's the polar opposite to what we saw with Jack Eichel. I mean, Jack Eichel, at several times during the season, he was not accepting losing games.
No.
And he would show that. I mean, everyone probably remembers the clip where he ended up snapping his stick going into the intermission. I mean, everyone ended up seeing that. And I would say with the way that it came out, I would say Jack Eichel's more the leader of this team at this point versus O'Reilly.
100%. 100%. And one of the photos that pops into my mind was a photo that was taken of Jack Eichel still skating on the KeyBank Center ice way after the game was over, alone, just looking completely dejected. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it was sad, really sad to see a player that young already know that, hey, I'm in this for the long haul. And frankly, he signed on the dotted line for a 10-year deal. There are moments, I think, in his mind where he's thought to himself, this better change fast, or I will seek to it that I won't stay here. I don't think he's that type of guy, which is why he signed that 10-year deal. But if things don't change, which I think they are, but let's just say if things don't change 2-3 years from now and there's still this bottom 5, bottom 3 NHL team, I worry about him wanting to be here, because I know if the shoe was, if I was wearing his skates, so to speak, I wouldn't want to be, if that was the case.
Right. And that wouldn't be the first time that something like that's ever happened either.
Right.
I mean, when you look at some of the things that's going on in the past, I mean, Ryan O'Reilly wanted out of Colorado for that same reason when he ended up being traded here. Colorado at that time, even though they had just brought in Nathan McKinnon, and although they were that bottom 5 team, especially with him, Gabriel Landeskog. I mean, there were some issues there on that team, and he wanted out of that situation. And essentially what's happening now is that I think he's finding himself in a similar situation where we haven't won games. And I think it's a little bit different from what Tim Murray would have actually told O'Reilly, him being a big part of the resurgence of this team. So I think there is a little bit of that going on, but I would say it's got to be up to him to go ahead and set that example. Mm-hmm. And if he wants to lead this team going forward, he can't be saying stuff like that out in the open to everybody.
Right.
I mean, that's something where he's got to go out on the ice and he's got to produce. Granted, he's one of our best face-off men. There's no doubt about that. But he needs to go out there and produce consistently. And if someone on the team is not doing what they're supposed to do, he's got to show them that example and work with them and really take that bull by the horns and make it his team if he's going to be someone that's going to be here long term.
And one thing that you touched on there, which was great, and I'm really enjoying you on the show, having you on and everything. I really appreciate you coming on today. One of the things that I took from that, snippet that you stated was that he's a fantastic face-off centerman, which is very tough. Like that is a very hard part of hockey, and it's a very important part of hockey that essentially if you have a centerman that's winning, the percentage of faceoffs that Ryan O'Reilly was winning, you're maintaining puck position very, very well. Your puck position time per game with Ryan O'Reilly in your lineup is pretty damn good. But when you have a guy that is so lackadaisical, I referred to him as the Jay Cutler of the Buffalo Sabres, which that's not a good thing. That's a guy that he seems very dejected, doesn't show much energy, doesn't show hustle. I've said that like the last couple years, I've noticed it. And then these statements kind of doubled down on my claim of that. Doubled down on, well, not only does he not hustle on the ice, he has this Eeyore personality off the ice, which I would have liked to have seen him get traded yesterday. I'll be frank about it. I really would have liked to have seen him get moved. He's not. He's still a member of the team. Maybe, do you think, what are the chances of that, Jason Bottrill and Phil Housley might have had a chat with him and said, hey, man, we expect you to be one of the few leaders of this team. You either need to be that leader or we're going to find an alternative option.
Well, I think that it's very possible that chat might have happened. And I would also say, too, I know there's a split in terms of the fans that want to keep O'Reilly here and the fans that want to see O'Reilly go somewhere else. This is kind of one of those things where, yes, if you get rid of him, you're losing someone that won 61.8% of his faceoff percentage.
Right.
This year, and it consistently has been over 60%. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you have to wonder, is it addition by subtraction? And I think that if we were to go ahead and trade O'Reilly, which is certainly still possible, free agency is going to open up on July 1st, and of course there's still time to make trades before the beginning of the season. I think there is a possibility that it could certainly happen. One of the key things that a lot of people need to remember also is that O'Reilly's due a signing bonus this year, well, which of course that could be one of the reasons why teams didn't pull the trigger on him yesterday, because he is due that bonus on July 1st.
Wow.
So it is possible that after July 1st, then we might see a little bit of a market open up. But don't be surprised if you see John Tavares get moved or stay first before other teams take a look at O'Reilly, because with what the Islanders have been doing with bringing in Lou Lamoriello and then, of course, bringing in Barry Trotz, which I think Washington was totally stupid to let Barry Trotz go, by the way.
That was an insane – we'll talk about that, too, because that headline, I burst out laughing when I saw that Washington let him go, and then I saw that he kind of he kind of one-upped them and was like, well – I'll go where the money is, and where there is some young talent there. That was insane.
Yeah, that absolutely was insane. And he was only on the market for 1 day after that whole deal.
Right, literally less than a day. It was almost less than a day.
But it's something where I do see that O'Reilly could end up somewhere else once we hit July 1st, and it certainly is possible. If we do trade him, I would say that it's going to be a combination of picks, and I do think that we're going to either end up with some established players or some prospects that'll be good for the long-term development of the system. But I think right now, just what has to happen is that everyone does just need to be a little bit patient yet, because we still have a little over a week before that deadline opens up. So it's still very possible. Me personally, I would not have an issue if he gets traded. I mean, especially if it's going to be for long-term betterment of this team, and especially if it's going to give us better leadership on this team, that's going to be huge. And that's what I look at. I don't want to see 4 assistant captains this year. I want to see a captain and an assistant. Have your defined leadership, and let's run with it.
Right. And I think this is obvious that it's Jack Eichel's team. And I actually don't even care. I don't care about there's sometimes people say, like, well, this person hasn't earned it yet, or this person. I wouldn't be upset in the slightest if they just said in front of the entire team, whether it's Phil Housley or Jason Bottrill, quote unquote, something along the lines of, this is Jack Eichel's team on offense. This is Rasmus Dahlin's team on defense, along with Rasmus Ristolainen. You can throw in Sam Reinhart in there too. Those are the guys that should get it, in my opinion. I know Rasmus Dahlin hasn't played a second for the Buffalo Sabres yet, but let's just call a spade and not be like, oh, well, maybe Jason Pominville should be the captain, which I love Jason Pominville as much as anybody, but he's not going to be here that long. There's really no point in, if you're really trying to build something for the long haul, why stop embracing it there? You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? It just, yeah, I don't know. As far as the coaching situation with the Sabres, they've went through a few coaches since they let go of Lindy Ruff. They had Ted Nolan, Ron Rolston, Bilesma, and now they have Phil Housley. As far as Phil Housley goes, do you think that he is the right coach for this team moving forward?
Well, I think right now what's going to happen is moving forward, I think he's got a better chance of being a decent coach for this team. And I think part of it is that a lot of the roster was purged out ever since Botterill came over and took over for Tim Murray. I mean, a lot of what we have on the roster, I mean, I would say over half of it has changed over since that time. So I think now with the fact that we have some of the younger players coming up, I mean, for example, Brendan Gooley, Casey Middlestat, who's going to be in the mix. When you look at Rasmus Dahlin, who's going to be here. When you have some established younger players such as Ristolainen, who is without question our defensive leader right now, other than Dahlin, who's coming in.
Right.
Jack Eichel. When you look at those players and the fact that they've been gradually building up with more of that speed type two-way game, I think now Housley's going to finally have more of those players that are going to really be effective for that system versus what we had last season when you had primarily Bogosian, when you look at even when we had prior to that, when we ended up having Benoit Pouliot, who might walk on July 1st. When you look at some of those other players who, in some cases, are not even in the league anymore, I think now is that time where we should start to really see him make that mark on the team. Personally, when the announcement was made that Phil Housley was named the head coach, I wasn't really too crazy about it because I think we should have gone after Gerard Gallant, who is, of course, he ended up having a great year with the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that Gallant would have actually been a better choice for this team just because of the fact that he can really adjust the systems on the fly, and he had a great couple seasons with the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, he did.
And I think he would have been the overall better fit, but I want to at least give Housley a chance to see what he can do with his players on the ice. And if he still can't do it, let's say we get to the end of this coming season, or even let's say we stretch out to next year. If we're still a bottom 5 team, then at that point, I would say Botterill has to make that decision. Does Housley go? And I think at that point, there may be some options that open up.
Right. It's really interesting you mentioned that about Gallant because it's tough for me to admit this, and everybody that knows me knows that I wouldn't have the sports podcast if I wasn't some sort of sports fanatic, or as I call myself, a sports nut or a sports freak or whatever it may be. But it's been very tough for me the last, I'd say 5, 6, actually, if I really go back 11 years, it's been very tough for me to watch NHL hockey, mainly because of the Buffalo Sabres. When the Sabres when the Sabres were so good that many years ago, they were it had a very sentimental feeling. When that all fell apart, it's kind of like I'd compare it to a bad breakup. It was like this is not fun to reminisce on. I can't think back about it. I got to move forward and put my attention to something else. And really, oddly enough, like in my fandom and stuff like that of the Sabres, when things went south on July 1st, 2007, which was Chris Jury and Danny Briere when they walked out the door. That was when I really started getting into MMA. It was kind of like right when that happened, it was like I can't take this anymore. I had such a childhood bond with this team, with Hasek and Pekka and Grosek and all Donald Audette. I'm really dating myself. Brian Holzinger, like all those guys when they lost the Stanley Cup like that, and then when they were able to bring that team back together and in such quick fashion, and then let it fall apart like that, it's been very tough being a Buffalo Sabres fan. I would say it has been tougher being a Buffalo Sabres fan for me than it has been being a Buffalo Bills fan. And that says a lot, Tom.
Right. And the Bills have their own issues also. I mean, we look at what happened with 17 years of no playoffs, and we finally broke that streak this year.
Right.
But, I mean, July 1st, 2007, that is a day where anyone who really follows the Sabres is always going to remember, because at that time, we had Darcy Regier as the GM, and his policy at the time, and many people will remember this, and this was talked about a lot in the media, is that he would not negotiate with players during the season.
Right.
And he always preferred to do it after the season. So then, let's say we end up going into, we had that deep playoff run, and what happens is you only have maybe, 2 weeks to go ahead and negotiate with somebody. That's not enough time.
No.
Especially when you have two high-end free agents that you knew were going to look at possibly testing the market on July 1st that year.
Right.
So then, of course, what happens is that everyone remembers that Danny Briere ended up signing with the Philadelphia Flyers, and he ended up retiring as a Philadelphia Flyer. And then Chris Drury went to the Rangers, and he retired as the Rangers, and he actually still works in that organization.
Right.
There's a lot of things that can go into that, but I will say first, Darcy Regier was an idiot for not negotiating during the whole season, because he knew right up front, and even Chris Drury had mentioned that he wanted to negotiate, and Regier wouldn't do it. So,
right.
I mean, at that point, then he was going into the fact, well, maybe we'll keep one of the two free agents, and then, of course, you don't negotiate with Briere, and you have both of them walk. And this is where I see that there was a failure of ownership at that time, because at that time, it was Tom Golisano who owned the team. And when he ended up buying the team out of bankruptcy, I remember one of the quotes that he mentioned, and I'll paraphrase this for you. He said he wanted the team to be competitive, but he also wanted it to make a profit.
He wanted it to be financially sustainable. Those are his exact words. I remember that.
Exactly. And
right.
So what happens is that, based on saying that, and then, of course, we had Larry Quinn working in the organization at that time also, which, I mean, he should have never been brought back the second time. But the thing was is that by not negotiating with those two players, especially when those two players took you very deep into the cup playoffs,
right?
Not negotiating them, that set us back, I think, 5 steps. And really, at that time, Regier should have been fired. Quinn should have been fired. They should have never been able to come back. And what happened is that we ended up being stuck with Darcy Regier for another 10 years, up until when he was fired at the time that Tim Murray took over. And, I mean, that's just a total failure of ownership at that point. And, I mean, they should have let him go, but unfortunately they didn't.
I remember specifically about that day. I remember the next press conference after that. It was in the back room of the at the time, I don't even remember what it was called at the time. I think it was still the HSBC Arena. They've changed names so many times, but we'll talk about that later. They had that back room press conference or whatever, and Darcy Regier was trying to reiterate to the fans that, hey, we do have a core of players. We do have Roy. We do have Pominville. We do have Vanek. We do have a decent defense. We still have Ryan Miller, who's the best goalie in the world. He had just proven, he was one of the best goalies, rising talents in the National Hockey League. We're going to be competitive. And Larry Quinn, literally, this is 100% a true story. And anyone that debates me on it, I can show them pure evidence that it happened. He kicked Darcy Regier under the table. When Darcy Regier said that, he literally shuffled his feet at him, and Darcy was like, tried not to make a noise or anything about it. But what a joke of a time that was, and not even just how bad that was, but it took the Sabres a long time, in the eyes of their opponents to come out of that. They're competing with, at the time, 29 other teams to be the best team that they can be, and it left this skid mark essentially on the image of the Sabres around the whole National Hockey League. And it was just not a good day.
No, it really wasn't. And there are so many things that could have been different that specific day, but unfortunately it was the failure of the GM and the failure of ownership at that time to understand the value that these two players ended up bringing to the table. Right. And had they actually gone ahead and resigned at least one, preferably both of them, I think there is a very good possibility we could have made a deeper run that following year or even the next couple of years.
Right.
And then just to kind of piggy off your point there with that core, the other issue that we ran into is that with the core itself, right. Pominville, Vanek, and Roy.
Right.
And Darcy Regier overvalued and seemed to overhype a lot of these players. And I mean, although Pominville did some good things for us, and Vanek did some good things with us as well, I mean, same with Roy. The three of them, truth be told, they were not the long-term answer.
No.
And it's one of those things where he held onto that core way too long. And I think that was also one of the other issues that kind of brought us to where we are at this point.
One dynamic of that day that I always found to be entertaining, and this kind of, I'll move into the present, but one dynamic of that day in the future, I'll move into the future too. One dynamic of that day that really irks me still to this day is that they had Briere pending free agency. They had Jury pending free agency. They had Vanek, who was basically offered a boatload of money by the Edmonton Oilers at the time, a 7-year, I think it was 49 something crazy. I don't remember what the exact number was off the top of my head.
Yeah, it was definitely a 7-year deal, and the amount that you mentioned is right in the ballpark of what they offered.
Right, I thought it was somewhere around there.
At that time.
Right, that's a lot of money at that time, and Edmonton made him that offer. And Buffalo could have matched it or not matched it. Had they not matched it, Buffalo would have got like 4 first-round picks. And they also could have signed Briere and Jury essentially for around $9 million together, rather than just signing Thomas Vanek for 7 or 8. And they would have got 4 first-round draft picks in the process.
I know. Yeah, and looking back at that, it honestly probably would have set us up better than where we were at this point.
They wouldn't have had to do this. Essentially, they might not have had to do this stupid tank where they had to really suck, like really, really hard and bad in order for them to, get the players that they needed to get in order to become a contender again. I guess it's water under the bridge, but I always look back on that because I really think that day translated into where we're at now. I know it was so long ago and it was 11 years ago, but that's really what started this whole thing of getting these young players that we're drafting, that we're grooming through the minor league system. That's really what started this, essentially. Would you agree with that?
I would, because a lot of those events led to where we're at this point. I mean, when you look at how Vanek was offer sheeted at that time, when you look at how Briere and Jury were basically allowed to walk for nothing, and you got no compensation in return. And when you look at the core with Roy, Pominville, and Vanek, then afterwards, and the fact that we weren't doing anything to bolster our offensive pool that we have, when we kept overvaluing some of our defensive talent, when you overvalued players like Tyler Ennis, which, I mean, he's actually going to be probably bought out at this point because he hasn't done anything since he was traded. When you look at everything that went into it, when you look at some of the bad rookie contracts like Mikhail Grigorenko, a lot of that all led to where we're at this point, where basically we couldn't just band-aid everything. We had to really open up everything and really start from the ground up. And unfortunately, that's where we're at this point. But I do think that things are starting to turn the corner a little bit, and especially now with what we've done the last 2 years in the draft. Actually, I would even say the last 3 years with some of the prospects that Tim Murray did pick, such as Cliff Boo. I mean, I've seen him in the development camp, and I had a chance to see him on on the 3-on-3 and
Right.
rookie last year. He's going to be someone definitely to watch. And then also with some of the players we ended up picking up last year, one of the goalies I'm really impressed with is Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who just signed an entry-level deal with us here at the Sabres.
He's very good. I really like him a lot. That was a signing that is solid. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a lot to love about his game, and I had a chance to see him multiple times last summer, and I will tell you, he is very much I would say, a cross between Miller and his prime, and I would even say he resembles a lot of what Pekka Rinne can do, and that says a lot. I mean,
yeah,
he's going to be someone good.
Yeah, I would really love to see them get back to what they kind of have always somewhat found, lightning in a bottle. I mean, they weren't essentially supposed to get Hasek, or they didn't know what they were getting when they got Hasek. I think everybody could say that. I mean, that was like the ultimate lightning in a bottle trade.
Absolutely.
For them.
And Chicago's probably wondering, why did we do that trade back when they did the trade in '92?
Right. But they have also had one thing about the Sabres that I hate bringing this up, but it's true, is like they have time and time again, they have also essentially let players walk, not just Breer and Jury, guys like Alexander McGillney, letting these guys walk for the silliest of reasons. I remember one of the first interviews I ever did was with Rick Azar. He was the sports guy for Channel 7. And he told me a story about how when Danny Gare and Jim Schoenfeld were traded, they were literally at the Buffalo Niagara airport crying like 10-year-old girls that they were being traded. They were just completely heartbroken. I mean, there is something about the hockey team, the players that come through the system here, whether it's Rochester and then Buffalo, they do not want to leave. And that's the biggest part of why I've kind of gone after a guy like Ryan O'Reilly, because I don't feel like he appreciates this team, giving him the chance that they did, and why I really want that back. I want that back of players wanting to have this collective us against them mentality, to where eventually they are quote unquote scary good again, like Rick Jeanneret said. It kind of snuck up on us there really, really, really quick. And just like that, it was gone. And it's so tough to get that back.
Right, and that's something. I mean, even another example I can give you that's not with the Sabres, but Jim Kelly didn't want to be here when he first was drafted.
Right, right. That's the best example there is.
And eventually, as he settled in, I mean, this community really became home to him, and it's been home to him ever since. I mean, really, the truth is, I mean, Buffalo has some of the best sports fans in the world, and some of the most loyal sports fans in the world. And I mean, I've been a Buffalo person all my life. I've grown up here. I've worked here, and I still am here in the area. I mean, I almost actually ended up moving out of New York State back in 2007. I actually had a position lined up in Pittsburgh, and I would have worked down there, and things worked out the way they did, where unfortunately that company did end up going out, so I had no position down there.
Wow.
But they kind of, in a way, it's one of those things where, in a way, it kind of made me realize how much this area is important. And and I'll tell you, I mean, even no matter what, even if I were to be out of the area at some point, or let's say I stay here for all being, I mean, there's nothing that can deny the loyalty of the fans here, and there's nothing that can deny how good this community is. I mean, there's a ton of great people in this area.
Oh, yeah.
People will always support everybody.
Right. And it's one of the things that it's always been kind of anyone that lives in Buffalo, it's always kind of a part of their identity that they're from here. And I feel like part of my identity is this town. You know what I mean? It's like I constantly wear, like right now, I'm wearing a Sabres hat, Sabres shirt. I'm always representing the Buffalo sports scene or the city in the best way that I can. And you do a really good job at that too. And that's one of the things that I, one of the many reasons why you drew my attention as far as having you on the show. You're one of those guys that is like me, that actually takes pride in the teams. And really that says a lot, because if a woman doesn't think that you're patient, you should just tell her that you're a Buffalo sports fan, and that should be it. That should be all. That's the end all be all. Patience is definitely a virtue. Being a Buffalo sports fan, so
yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah, and I'll tell you, even a lot of times, even on our own podcast that we've had throughout the sites that I'm a part of, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, anytime I've ever been around this area, I mean, more often than not, you're going to see me wearing either Bills or Sabres hats or a shirt. In fact, I even have I have a limited edition camo Sabres hat that I ended up getting through New Era. So
that's awesome.
And
yeah.
Of course, got my girlfriend set up with some Sabres gear as well.
Nice.
And, things are good there. But I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, this is our team. I mean, the Sabres are our team. The Bills are our team. And it's our team. Let's be proud about it. And,
right.
And that's one of the great things about this area is that our sports fans are proud about it, and they're not afraid to show it.
Right. As far as some of the sites that you're a part of, just to let everybody know, you're part of two really awesome, actually a few, I shouldn't even say two, because you're part of like 4 or 5. I can't even put a number on it because I see you posting stuff all the time. Buffalo Sabres Blue and Gold Mafia, Buffalo Sabres Next Wave, the KeyBank Center Renovation Facebook group, the Buttes Nation Facebook group, and the Twitter handle is BHW Media, at BHW Media on Twitter. Go into a little bit for the viewers and for myself. I know a little bit about these Facebook groups, obviously, but go into what those represent. Obviously, the Sabres Blue and Gold Mafia and the others that you're a part of.
Yeah, so the Buffalo Sabres Blue and Gold Mafia, that's our big page that we have. I mean, right now, we have well over 4,000 members that are part of it, and we're welcoming people at a really fast clip lately. But we talk about everything about the Buffalo Sabres. We did real-time draft coverage on there on the first round, and we also had streaming coverage on the second round, so we do cover that. We go into depth a lot about some of the different team issues, different trades. We do post some Sabres news. We do also post some different speculation on different possible trades that may come up, and we also do some podcasts on there as well too, such as the Buffalo Sabres 411, and we have our show After the Horn, which we usually do after games during the season. So I mean, that's our major site, and then I will also throw in too, on top of that, we do have our Facebook site Sabres Talk 365, which is dedicated to podcasts, and we do a lot of work there. I know you've been on there. Our partner Bobby Hansen, he's a huge Sabres fan as well. He does a lot of podcasting on there. Mm-hmm. And then we have Buffalo Sabres Next Wave. That's our page that's dedicated to covering the Rochester Americans and the Cincinnati Cyclones, UCHL. Mm-hmm. And we have some great people running that. I know Jeremy McBeth is one of them, who's out of Rochester. And then we also have, I believe it's Don Messina, who just joined us. He's out of Rochester as well. So we've got some people in Rochester running that page.
Nice.
Then, and then we have Buttes Nation, which was, to our knowledge, it's still the very first Facebook page that's not owned by the NWHL that was dedicated to the Buffalo Buttes, and we opened that up during the first season. And
wow, that's really cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Growing as well, and we do a lot of coverage with that team, and we did cover some different things with the NWHL playoffs, especially this past season when they ended up playing in New Jersey. And I know our buddy Justin Ehrig is heading up a lot of the efforts on that, and then same thing with several others. Justin Ehrig is actually with the 11-day power play. He's going to be doing that again this year, and we've had him on for some different shows, and he's been great. And then really from there, we have the KeyBank Center renovation site, which we just launched a few months ago, and that's actually kind of piggybacking off of some of the recent announcements where the Bagula Sports and Entertainment is looking at some possible changes to the building. Mm-hmm. So then we figured, you know what? Let's put some things from the fan point of view on there to show, hey, this is what we want, and get some ideas, and that's really just more of our concept page where we can all throw out some things, and I know you're a part of that, I'm a part of it, and
right.
It's also a spot where we can showcase some different trends that are happening with some of the other teams in their buildings. Right,
and I can tell you, like, there's a lot of things that it's easy to get my attention when it comes to sports stuff. Very easy. It's like, a kid in a candy store. Really, when there's sports stuff posted on Facebook, I'm always chiming in on stuff. But one thing that really got my attention in terms of some of the stuff that you are working on outside of the Facebook groups with the Sabres and talking about the Sabres was that Key Bank Center renovation group, because that's something that I've talked about on my show. And I'm not saying it to sound like selfish. I'm just saying it like to know that there's other people out there that think like me. It really means a lot. With that Facebook group, it really did though. I was like, wow, this is awesome. This I really hope that it continues to gain ground, because it's something that I think is really serious. Really is.
Yeah, and it's something where I mean that building is going to need some changes to remain competitive. And what unfortunately one of them, even though a lot of the Buffalo fans are the most loyal in the world, a lot of the fans sometimes are stuck in the mindset, oh, we don't need any changes, so we don't need to have any changes with the building. It's perfect the way it is, and so forth. But for us to remain competitive, we are going to have to make some improvements to that building. Now, one of the things that I can tell you, the Harbor Center did wonders for us because it allowed us to take the NHL Combine from Toronto, and we've actually kept it ever since
Right.
that building opened up. So when you figure that we have everything going through Buffalo now on the Combine, and to my knowledge, it's going to be here again next year, so they've actually extended it from the initial deal. The fact that we've kept it out of Toronto's hands, I love that.
Right, I do too.
Pride.
Yeah, that's a huge feather in our cap for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
But it really made sense for the NHL to keep it here because, I mean, in Toronto, they don't have the facilities that we have. I mean, with the Harbor Center, you have the 2 on-ice rinks where you can have your skills testing, you can have your interviews in the Key Bank Center with suites. You have a place right there that everyone can stay with, the Harbor Center Marriott. I mean, everything is all in one complex that you can literally stay indoors and walk the entire thing. And that's huge. I mean, it does a lot of great things for the teams, and the teams have loved it. And as good as the Harbor Center is, Key Bank Center, for it to continue to be as good as it is going to have some work done. And unfortunately, some of the things in the building right now, seating absolutely should be improved and replaced. Because I mean, I remember one of your podcasts recently where you ended up talking about how they had a piece of 2x4 as an actual armbar.
Is an armrest? Is an armrest? Why?
They had that, and you showed the picture of that. And I mean, it's like, come on, guys. I mean, this is supposed to be a world-class arena. But when you have things like that where the seating is all original, and when you have a scoreboard now that's 11 years old this year, there's been some games I've been to where part of the scoreboard doesn't even work anymore. And there were some times where you'd see it go to a black screen and then flicker on and off a little bit. When you have that, and then just when you look at what some other buildings around the NHL and the NBA have done or are about to do, I mean, it's really up to Pagula Sports Entertainment and the area to make sure that we keep that building top notch. Because if we don't, who's to say that the Combine can't move somewhere else, or who's to say that the World Junior Championships won't come back, or if you follow college basketball, the NCAA round 1 or round 2 tournaments.
Right. Which that was a huge success attendance wise. You know, they're still doing fairly well. I know the Sabres have been pretty bad for the last few years, obviously, but attendance-wise, you know, on TV at least, it looks like it's somewhat packed. Maybe not as packed as it was in 05, 06, 07, obviously, but, you know, there's still a draw. And you have to what you were saying there, you have to put money into your draw, right?
Absolutely. And I can attest firsthand the fan experience has not been as good, especially in the last several years compared to what it has been previously. And I think there's a lot of different things that go into it. I mean, obviously the Sabres not playing well is part of that, and that's something that does need to be fixed. But when you look at how little things such as some of the in-game entertainment is not as good as it or the scoreboard, it doesn't even shoot smoke out of the Buffalo Sabres logo anymore, and it hasn't for the last couple of years.
Right.
Little touches like that kind of gets everybody into the game. When you have, for example, Columbus, you have the cannon net players when the Blue Jackets score, or in Minneapolis with the Wild, where at the XL Energy Center, where they have the lighthouse in there, or when you look at Pittsburgh, where they have some different lighting that goes off with the goal whenever the fans score over at PPG Paints Arena, which is a beautiful arena.
Yeah, that's an amazing arena. I've actually been there. Yeah, a few times.
I've been able to see some games there. Actually, I saw the first time I was in there was the first season it opened, and just seeing some of the different fan amenities that they have in there that's really interactive and allows you to really be part of the game. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
And then even Cleveland with the Quicken Loans Arena. I know you've been there, and that's actually, anyone who's been on the renovation page, that's basically the exact design of the scoreboard that I proposed. So,
right. That got my attention, and some of the things that you were talking about with the Harbor Center, it's almost as if to me, the Harbor Center was a blessing, and in a way, it was a curse, because with how nice the Harbor Center is, it's great. But with how nice it is, it's bad, because when you see how nice the Harbor Center is, and then you go across the street to KeyBank Arena, you realize that it needs to be updated. Just based on your two eyes, based on your seeing power. It's just not. It looks the same as it did when I was maybe 12. And I'm not 12 anymore, obviously. So, it needs work. That's for sure.
It is very true, and a lot of the work that's been done in the KeyBank Center has really been behind the scenes, such as the Bandits locker room, which was updated, the Sabres locker room. A lot of people that follow the team know what was done there.
Right.
But the actual inside of the arena, other than signage, I mean, there really hasn't been a massive update that's taken place since it opened in 1996.
Right.
The good thing is that the way that it was built, there really hasn't had to be a lot of changes until this point. But at the same time, there is a time that's going to come where we need to update that building, and really a lot of it is, regardless of how the team is actually performing, you really want it to be something where the fans are going to have a fun time when they're going to be there, and that you want them to come back. And that's a lot of what the proposal ended up coming up to. But there's also a lot of things that need to be fixed too, and some of the things I'll tell you in the proposal I had on that site, one of them was basically adding additional escalators from the 100 level to the 300 level, because right now we're sitting in the butt trying to get out of there.
Oh my God.
Having that, that's a huge thing. One thing I remember during a Sabres broadcast, and this was, I think, 2 seasons ago, a lot of people will remember when Rick Jeanneret was actually it was in between the benches. And the reason that happened is the freight elevator didn't work. They couldn't get up to the press level, and that building was originally, and that's a true story.
That's
the building originally was set up to have 2 of them. They didn't have enough money at the time, so they only put 1 of them. And they still have space for a second one, so guess what? Put a second one in, just in case. Other things like some of the concessions could be updated. The team store, I think, could be expanded a little bit and updated and be a little bit more interactive to the fans. And
I feel like it should be open longer. Is it just me? Yeah, or earlier or something. I don't know. I feel like it should be on a Sabres game day. It should be something that's open all day.
I think so too. And that's one of the drawbacks where other teams will actually do that. So by having that additional accessibility is going to be huge. And then the other thing, actually, a perfect example I can give you of a really awesome team store is look at what Chicago did when they ended up building the United Center atrium recently next door to the United Center.
Right.
They actually opened up a team store that houses not only the Blackhawks and the Bulls, but it's actually double the size of the team store we have. And the interesting thing is that we have one of the largest team stores in the NHL already. But what they also did with it is they put in interactive things for the fans to be a part of, such as interactive touch displays. They have things where you can actually see a lot of the different stats on the players right up front. And they've done other things also with the game experience, such as having, for example, smartphone availability where you can see real-time stats and replays as you want to take a look at them.
Wow.
Stuff like that. That's some of the technology that has been starting to go in some of these buildings. Pittsburgh is huge. They have a huge setup in the PPG Paints Arena where it really is very interactive with fan displays. You can actually do real-time messaging to the ribbon boards in between periods and before the game, and I've done that. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah, and then they actually do have real-time text updates with where they can tell you how the game went, the scores, how everything ended up going, for example, like penalties, different things like that. They really do a lot to keep their fans into the game. So that's some of that stuff. I mean, yes, there is always going to be the money factor with it, but if you were to step out of Buffalo and you go into any of these buildings that are even the Quicken Loans Arena, I mean, it's similar in age to ours.
One arena that really, it's like you're talking about all the arenas. One arena that I went to, well, actually two arenas that I went to were the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning, where the consensus in like hockey is that like Florida is not a true hockey state. And I think they would even agree with that. They're not, it's Florida. Like you don't think, I think South Beach, I think the Dolphins, I think the Bucks, I think, I don't think hockey when I think of Florida, but they have put more money into their arena within the last 15 to 20 years than the Buffalo Sabres have.
Absolutely, and you're 100% right about that. And actually, I can tell you a couple of things that both places have done. The Florida Panthers, the BB&T Center, they not only replaced the scoreboard a few years ago, but they actually even updated that ever since, just this past year, where they have a brand new scoreboard control system, which is one of the most advanced that's available anywhere. And it offers that real-time fan interactivity. It has a connected TV system that goes right through that. They've also put in brand new 4K displays. And
yeah, it was crystal clear picture. Yeah, it was. I went this past year. Yeah, I went this past year, and it was just so. And one of the things that I think is a real shame too is when I walk into the arena, and it's nothing against, the people that are a part of it, but there's this little strip in the arena in the KeyBank Center where it's like a Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame, and it is probably the worst representation of a quote unquote Hall of Fame that I've ever seen. And one of the worst Hall of Fame. I wouldn't say worst. There were a lot of great things about it, but I went to the Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota recently, and it was so sad how small it was, and that they were taking donations just to keep it open. Like that should not ever happen, in my opinion. That's a sidebar on that. But with the Sabres stuff, it's like there's so much history with this team that even if there's teams that have been in existence, 15, 20 years, the Sabres have been in existence since 1970. Why do other teams market their history better than the Sabres do?
Yeah, and that's a huge question, and that's something that the Sabres need to do a much better job of, and that's actually part of what that proposal is as well, because one of the other things that I mentioned in that proposal that I put together is that, of course, the DLMW train terminal is going to eventually reopen, and there is talk that it is going to be connected into the KeyBank Center. So how about using some of that space? First off, I mean, you can have some different team offices there, but open it up and have the actual true representation of a Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame. That's not going to be in one corner of the KeyBank Center that nobody's going to see.
It's really funny funny that you say that, because I know two gentlemen specifically that are really, really, really trying to build a sports Hall of Fame for the city of Buffalo, a Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame. That the proposal that I saw, which I'll send you the stuff on it, the proposal that I saw was where it would be located right near the Seymour or the Albright Knox art gallery. That was what I had heard as far as it being built. And like Thurman Thomas has said he'd donate, Jim Kelly said he'd donate, Daryl Talley said he'd donate, Ralph Wilson's what is the word for it? Estate, maybe.
Ralph Wilson Foundation, I think.
Yeah, Ralph Wilson Foundation. But his family basically said that they will donate in stuff in his name. Just so many things. And I know we don't have a Major League Baseball team, which I always thought we should, or an NBA team, but there's a lot of history that I feel like it's being passed up on. And some of the reason why I wonder it's being passed up on is what I was alluding to earlier, where the Sabres especially have severed a lot of ties with some of their greatest players.
I think that's part of it, and
Right.
that's a shame to see that too. Because when you look at the history of the players we've had, I mean, of course, you have the French Connection, you have Danny Gare, who's still actively around in the community. When you look at other players, Alexander Mogilny, one of the first Russian players to ever defect and come over to the NHL.
Right.
I have other players such as, I mean, Yuri Himalev did a lot for this team. You have Hasek, of course, which actually, a funny little sidebar is that his daughter actually used to be in my sister's dance school. So,
Oh, wow.
So like, the two of them used to do things together.
Wow.
When you look at the history of this team, even LaFontaine, who was a great player.
LaFontaine was the main example.
Yeah, right. I mean, he was a great player during this time. I don't agree with what he did in his management stuff with Tim Murray, but there was no denying he was a great player. And when you look at that history of what we have and the tradition of what we have, it's a shame that it's not celebrated more. And a part of going to that renovation site was really to try and bring in that history back into the game, that tradition back into the game. I'll tell you, I remember when the Odd was torn down, and I remember seeing that building torn down. I actually saw it when it was opened up, and of course, when I was growing up, I mean, I'm going to be 36 in about 2 weeks, but I mean, I remember seeing games in there when I was a little kid, and in the Odd, and just absolutely loved it. I was up in the nosebleeds, and it felt like you were right on top of the action. And my dad actually, he's no longer in New York State, but he actually was a junior Sabre, so, so he had some history with the team and several others. But when you look back at that history and you see what we have now in our building, we're not really celebrating the actual history. That's a shame, and we really should start doing that.
Pegula's touched on that a little bit already with the Buffalo Bills. He's retired numbers since he became the owner of the Bills and the Sabres. As far as the LaFontaine stuff that you kind of touched on, I was going to bring that up actually. What was it in your eyes that he did with Tim Murray that you didn't agree with? You mentioned that.
Well, I think that his whole deal of wanting to keep Ryan Miller was probably not the best move, because at the time, I mean, Ryan Miller was on the downside of his career, and currently, even now, he's still on the downside of his career. I mean, his best playing days are over, and he wanted to have Miller be here long term, and I don't think that was the best move. And of course, he ended up walking right after that when he didn't get his way, and when Tim Murray ended up going ahead and trading him. And I still think that was the best move to trade him at the time, because I mean, realistically, especially since his contract was coming up, did we want to be stuck with having a goalie that was past his prime long term?
The team was going in another direction. Exactly. It was transitioning, and I just felt like he might have been wrong in wanting Miller to stay, but I've heard things, and we won't really know essentially until there was like a disclosure agreement, or non-disclosure agreement that they made with him. But I've heard things that Pat LaFontaine did want Ryan Miller to stay long term, but Terry Pegula told him that Pat LaFontaine told Terry Pegula that he would come on board if it meant that Ryan Miller would stay long term. He's a USA Hockey guy. Ryan Miller's obviously a USA Hockey guy. He wanted that niche in that team to stay relevant. He enjoyed that. And Terry Pegula said that he would bring him on to make that, he would make Ryan Miller stay in order to bring him on. And then when they brought in Tim Murray, who was this, I don't even know what word to use. He was just this amped up, angst-filled guy that wanted Ryan Miller gone. Pat LaFontaine was kind of like, well, then what the hell am I doing here then? And that was kind of what led him to quit, which in that regard, if that's true, which I don't know if it is, but Ted Nolan said that he's like, I know Pat LaFontaine is not a quitter. He didn't quit. He didn't quit, which I'm going to take. I do trust Ted Nolan because he was there in the situation, so there's a lot to that. I think there's a lot more to that story than what has come out. I really do.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think any of us will ever know the true story about it.
Right. If they say, well, until Pat LaFontaine is gone and passed on, or whatever the disclosure, it was a crazy disclosure agreement, non-disclosure agreement that they signed, and it's like, did someone like punch somebody in the face, or was it like did like Terry Pegula like body slam Pat LaFontaine, or like what happened? Like,
right, right. Because usually you're not going to see that type of an agreement take place.
no, I've never seen that. I've never seen that. Not in baseball is one of those sports where a lot of controversial stuff happens with managers and owners and stuff like that. George Steinbrenner never even signed a non-disclosure agreement.
Right, and then of course we know what Steinbrenner always said. He didn't care. He just paid the luxury tax every single year.
Right. Yeah, that definitely did happen. But yeah, I'm really liking the stuff that you're doing as far as the Facebook groups and stuff. I think Facebook is one of the best ways to communicate with other people and fans, and really it's been something that I've used a lot to help promote this podcast and stuff. As far as like your journey a little bit, I want to kind of talk about you. When did you really start getting into this? Has this always been like a passion for you, or did something kind of just change in your life that made you say, hey, I want to really dive into this more, dive into, being a social media proponent, shall I say, for the Buffalo Sabres?
Yeah, well, I would say it's definitely been more in the last 5 years that it's really started to become something that I've enjoyed. And I mean, I've always loved the team, and I figured, okay, well, I think just a light bulb went on at some point, and it basically got me thinking, all right, maybe join a couple groups, see what a lot of other fans would have to say. And basically, the very first group I ever joined was actually the Buffalo Sabres Mafia. It was only about a year old at the time, and this is going back about 4 years now.
Right.
So then, as I got more involved with it, basically from there, I liked a lot of what the fans were saying, and I liked a lot of the different things that were being talked about. I started getting more involved into it, and then eventually what ended up happening is that I ended up becoming one of the site admins, and now in a lot of ways I manage a lot of the things that we do on the site every day. So it really kind of started to go into its own, and then from there I really kind of decided to work with site creator Jeff Beaver, which he's done a lot of great things. Worked with him, and then we ended up starting to do some different partnerships. I know we feature your podcast on there, and we feature others as well. And we have our own now. We've really started to kind of cover the team from every angle possible.
Right.
And one of the things that we've seen is a huge growth in membership. I mean, I would say in the last few years, we've probably added more than half of our members just alone.
Right.
And then even now with the draft just passing by in the last couple of days, I mean, we've really started to see a huge spike in everything. And then part of it kind of came out also where I'm like, all right, let's cover some more of the things in depth, like Rochester and Cincinnati. So then that ended up sparking the different sites that we ended up coming up with Next Wave, and then I know the Buffalo Buttes. That was just one of those I wanted to be first to cover it. So
right.
At that point, I figured, all right, get that created and launched, and then from there, it really kind of took off on its own. But it's not just anything I've done. I mean, it's been a really good group of people that have collectively come together and worked together as a team to really share our love for the sport. And I mean, I think it talks for itself. People love what they're seeing, and I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, we're always looking to do more and keep getting better with it.
Right, and I really appreciate the fact that you guys have used your platform to promote my platform. It's pretty awesome that it can kind of be its own community within a community in a way of having X amount of sports writers or sports podcast people or just people that love dialogue about the team. I've talked with people on there that they are Sabres addicts. They're addicted to the Buffalo Sabres, which I love it. I think that's what separates Buffalo from any other, as we talked about earlier, from any other fan base. It's really funny to hear you say that it kind of went off for you like a light bulb, because it's kind of what happened with me, and I'll touch on it briefly. I literally was in my guest room at the time in my house, and my last house, and I thought, I've had these opinions flowing through my head about sports ever since I was 5 or 6 years old. Why not put it to tape? Why not put myself out there? Why not? There's nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose. There's nothing to lose out of it. There's only positives to gain from it, and just like you, there's only positives from here. Keep at it. because it's working. You know, there's definitely traction heading to these groups, traction heading to these posts that people are writing, and even if it's, I see it as if I post something and people are debating with me about it, whether they agree or disagree, does not matter. Does
Right.
not
It's a
matter
good
to me
thing.
at all.
It's
It's
a good thing
perfect.
because it
Yeah.
shows that they're involved and they
Right.
want to be involved.
Right.
And that's huge. I mean, and even on different podcasts that we've done over on Blue and Gold Mafia, same thing. I mean, someone may not always agree with it, or even co-hosts I've had on there, we've had differences in opinion on different things too. But that's the fun of it, because
Right.
it really shows that people are really thinking about the team, they're engaged with the team, and it's really something that this community is really great at. And I only see more and more good things coming out of it.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. As far as, you know, appreciate all the promotion that you guys do. I mean, you guys are great at promoting certain ideas. I mean, the KeyBank Renovation Center, you know, that the KeyBank Center renovation page, I should say, is really gaining steam, because I've seen people post stuff about it or on it that I know that are not as in tune with it as they used to be, but they're in tune with it now based on that page, because that's an idea that I think it transcends with a lot of people. I really
Yeah,
do.
and it's one of those things. I think it's going to be more and more probably too, because as we go forward and we see the combine here more often, and as we see a lot of these events come through, and especially now with talk of a possible new convention center, I mean, we really have to look at what are we going to do in the next 5 to 10 years with this building, and it's one of those things where I definitely want to see this place continue to do well. And a lot of it too is bringing back some of the tradition also. And that's one of the things I really wanted to make happen out of this proposal. And one of the other things I'll even touch on also is that for anyone who remembers the Odd, everyone remembers Norm Wallen's pipe organ. That was a huge, huge thing. That was there until 1996 when it shut down. And that's one of the things I would actually bring back in the proposal is similar to what Tampa did with the Amalie Arena. They actually blew out 3 sections of the upper deck, actually ended up putting together an organ stage where they actually had a live organ player that actually plays music during the games. And they have a little area where people can congregate and really watch the game, but also listen to different things at the same time and stuff like that. And that different seating options, of course, the scoreboard needs to be done. But I mean, really, those little touches of bringing back the Buffalo Sabres history and bringing it back into the game for the next generation of people in this area, that's huge. And I think sadly right now, some of the newer generation that's around that sees these games really, I don't think totally understands that tradition. So that's part of blending. So part of what it is really blending the tradition of the team with the modern day technology, and kind of making it really create its own unique fan experience, which I think is going to be huge.
As far as the probability, though, that you know, if you were to put a percentage on it, an article that came out on ESPN.com that was an interview that Mike Rodak, I believe, or Field Yates, one of the two, did with Kim Pagula. She talked about how the Bills Stadium, it's well known that they, you know, have made renovations to it the last few years. They put excess of $150 million into the stadium, but they have not and do not foresee a start in, you know, making or breaking ground on a new stadium yet. And her exact words were that they spent all their money essentially to buy the team, which when she said that, it really put a lot of concern in my mind when she said something to the, I'm paraphrasing there, but to the tune of that. She said that she you know, the family put, you know, all the money in buying the team. They own 2 major sports franchises, the 2 major sports franchises in one city, which not many, you know, owners, you know, not many cities can say that. Do you think that there is some sort of a, well, let's get competitive first before we do these things type issue?
Yeah, I would say it's a definite possibility that may be the avenue that they're taking. And I will say, I mean, there probably will be a new Bill Stadium at some point. I don't think it's going to be within the next 5 years by any means.
I don't either. Yeah.
And even 10 years might be pushing it,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times on these types of projects, it usually is going to take several years for it to, of course, go through the approval process, the design process, and everything that's needed before it breaks ground. I mean, for example, the Key Bank Center at the time that it was getting planned was known as the Crossroads Arena, and that planning started, I think, in 1990 or 91. And it didn't even open until 1996. So there was still about a 5-6 year period. And it took 2 years to build it. So something like that, I would say they're probably going to take the mindset, let's get competitive first. We'll do some incremental improvements with New Era Field, which they actually did renovate the club areas just this past spring, ever since the season ended.
Right.
It changed some things here and there with it. But I think that's going to be the likelihood that they're going to go, is that they're going to kind of take that wait and see approach with it. Do I think that stadium will eventually move? I do think it's going to probably happen. There's just nobody.
Do you see it in downtown Buffalo, or do you see it somewhere else?
I think ultimately it is going to be downtown, and I think it's going to be near the Key Bank Center more than likely.
Right. I would agree with that. I had a buddy of mine on the podcast, and we talked about it, and it's tough because as much as I'd love to see a stadium downtown, I feel like it might take away that tailgate experience a little bit, being that everything is so jam-packed, the traffic, the buildings, they'd make it work. I mean, there's plenty of space, there's plenty of empty buildings around Buffalo to knock down and to put some parking.
And what I'm kind of thinking about that too is, I mean, with any possible Bill Stadium, I mean, I'd not be surprised if they do something similar to what St. Louis had, where they tie it into a convention center project and really make it a true year-round facility.
Right.
And that's something I would not be surprised.
That's what I would love, because that would mean, possibly a dome. Possibly, that, and in St. Louis, the Rams played in a dome. They should do some sort of a retractable roof dome, because it would allow Buffalo so many more events than what they have right now. And I mean, they've had concerts at New Era Field the last few years. They had the Stones, and they had U2, and I think Beyonce and Jay-Z are coming in August. But I mean, it's just not. You talked about how you went to other stadium or to other arenas. I've been to other stadiums. I've been to a lot of other sports cities. And I would say that it's our stadium. I enjoy going to the games to an extent, but it's probably one of the worst stadiums in the NFL. I hate to say it, but it has a lot of modernization that needs to be modernized.
Yeah, absolutely, and I would agree with you on that. And I know you've one example I'll even throw out there too is I know you've been to the Q out in Cleveland, and that building's about to start a massive multi-million-dollar renovation where they're going to completely change the outside of it. They're going to change the inside again, and
they don't even really have to. They don't even really have to. They could leave it for another few years.
And the funny thing is that building only opened in 1994, but that building has seen more renovations than ours has, and ours opened in 1996.
Right.
But apparently, from what I understand on that project, they're going to spend almost $300 million to completely renovate the building.
Wow.
And Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay Lightning, their new owner has sunk over 200 to 300 million in redoing their building as well.
Have you seen the renderings for the two places, two different sports too, actually, the Vegas, the Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders stadium, and the Tampa Bay Rays ballpark that's being built?
Yeah, I've seen some different things on those, and I'll tell you, I mean, don't be surprised if that Vegas stadium's more expensive than what Jerry Jones built in Dallas.
Oh, so yeah, he might be
insane what they do over there.
I think Al Davis's son is doing that for his dad, just to stick it to Jerry Jones one last time.
Absolutely. And then even with the Tampa Bay Rays too, I know that they've been wanting to get out of Tropicana Field for a long time, and it looks like they're going to finally start going forward forward with it. But I know there had been some talk about where it should be, and it looks like that stadium's going to move on to St. Petersburg and actually be in downtown Tampa,
Yeah,
where the Emily Arena is.
right.
And I've actually been down in that area before. The last time I was down there was in 2010, and I was down there for a few days. And I'll tell you, I mean, they really did a nice job of how that whole area is. I mean,
Yeah.
Arena there, you're going to have the ballpark there, you have the convention center right there, you have a hotel right there, and that's where I'm thinking where the Bills eventually will probably move the stadium downtown, because you're going to have everything right in that central area, similar to what Philadelphia has with the Wells Fargo Center, Citizens Bank Park, and the Link. Basically, you have all three stadiums right in one spot, and it really allows a lot of that fan experience to go on, even during the off season.
Right.
So I think that's eventually going to happen.
Yeah, the Philly, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, they all have that. They all have their three major sports franchises in one area. And technically Buffalo would too, to an extent. You know, the Bisons are a minor league team, but Coca-Cola Field is actually one of the better minor league stadiums in the country. So I guess that's a feather in our cap too. But yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot of room for improvement. And when you see other cities that are deemed quote unquote small market cities, with like Minnesota, they have a beautiful stadium that just hosted the Super Bowl. They have a beautiful baseball park. Target Field is amazing. That's brand new. There's a lot of cities that are deemed small market. Cleveland, as you mentioned, with the Q. Do you think that like these cities that have these marquee franchise players, like obviously LeBron James would be the first one that comes to mind for Cleveland, do you think that's why they're able to improve their stadiums or their arenas, because they're making more money?
Well, it could be part of it. I mean, there's no doubt LeBron James brings in a boatload of money to that franchise, and he brings in a boatload of money to that area. But I think part of it also is that the community itself, Cleveland, I know that they tend to really want to stay more on top of keeping everything current. And when you look at the Q, how that's going to get renovated, I know Progressive Field has been renovated several times, and they had some scoreboard changes done a few years ago to give them one of the largest in all of baseball. And then when you look at First Energy Stadium, which made some improvements recently as well, I mean, even though the Browns haven't done much as a franchise in the last however many years, I mean, they're still trying to really get people to fill that stadium. They're trying to get people to enjoy that experience.
They still don't have a quarterback, though.
Well, the Browns, I mean, they still have a lot of work to do with their franchise, but at the end of the day, what those teams realize is that they're competing with people that'll stay home, and they're competing with TV. So you need to have something that's different to get them into enjoying the game and to have that experience. So that's where a lot of what comes up on renovating the KeyBank Center, I think, comes into play, where you have to make it different to where you want people to be there, and you have to continually invest in it. And it shouldn't have to wait 20 years to have a massive $300+ million project, possibly. It should be something that's ongoing. I mean, Toronto does this, and I mean, their scoreboard was built the same year ours was, and they already replaced it 3 years ago now. So they wanted to keep the technology current. Carolina Hurricanes, their scoreboard was built 2 years after ours was, and they're already going to replace it next year.
Wow.
So, and they're also improving some of the seating, and they're adding different fan elements that's going to keep the fans involved.
The main area there that is bad with the KeyBank Center is the seating. It is really bad. Really bad.
The sidelines are great, but the seats, let's be honest, they suck.
Right. And the lighting too. The lighting of the games is not that good. And that was what I was going to talk about with the Florida Panthers game. The lighting there, like I actually have pictures in my photo gallery from Sabres games and pictures in my photo gallery from Panthers games, and they do look like two completely different places just based on the lighting. Like if it really why do you think that these discussions are just not happening? Why do you think that there hasn't been much put forth, put in place for stuff like this?
Well, I think there's a lot of I think there's a couple of different things that go at it. I think first of all, a lot of it's a political climate because you're going to have people that don't want to do it, they don't want to spend, they want things to stay the way it is, and I think part of it also is sometimes even though the fans love the team, I think a lot of them stay stuck on how they want to keep everything as it used to be, and unfortunately, we have to evolve, and that's something that the good teams in the good areas will do. Now, politicians, that's above all our pay grades. I mean, we can all go back and forth on that forever and ever. But it's one of those things where I think everybody's got to kind of get on that same page and really have that discussion, because if we don't do something about it sooner or later, then it's going to just cost more and more and more. And then if we get to the point of looking at a new arena, let's just say there's a situation in Calgary where they ended up saying that they were not going to do a new arena for the Calgary Flames, then there's a possibility of losing the team. And unfortunately, don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So only recently did Calgary decide with their government to start talking about building a new building to replace the Saddle Dome. So like that, when you have that, it shouldn't really be waiting until that point where there is the possibility of losing a team. That's what happened with the Buffalo Braves back in the 70s, where essentially the team wasn't doing well here. The Yard wasn't extensively renovated until 1990. And that was only to keep it until it would actually be replaced by the KeyBank Center. But it's one of those things where we've already lost a franchise in the past, and we shouldn't wait to get to that point again.
No, it's definitely a troublesome issue, that's for sure. And I appreciate all your insight on that, because some of it I didn't even know, and I like to think that I stay up to date with this stuff. But you one up me on my own show. How about that?
But really the big thing is, I mean, everybody loves the team cheer, and there's no denying that. But let's really think about getting the fan experience.
More statues too, more statues around the arena outside. Like I know the French Connection was one of the greatest, trios in NHL history, but we had one of the greatest goalies, if not the greatest goalie in the history of the game. You know what I mean? Like, why not call a spade and do a statue with Dominic Hasek hoisting a Stanley Cup in a Sabres jersey and just bend reality?
I mean, that would actually be one thing I would have no problem seeing. Although it's funny you mention that, because I did include Dominic Hasek in the proposal by one of the new club levels I figured putting into the building, where basically what would happen is it would blow out the top portion of the 100 level in one end of the arena and create new seating areas and actually create a Dominic Hasek club in there. So,
that's what they should do. And
yeah, definitely wouldn't be recognized, no doubt.
Right.
He should get some more recognition for what he did.
Right. His career was great then, but it's almost as if it ages like a fine wine now, because it was just, I mean, the numbers that he put together, the stretch of time that he did it in with the team that he did it on, the Sabres were a good team, but he made them a great team. He was just that.
He sold them wins, and he got them to really play better than they really were.
Yeah.
And that's huge. I mean, I would compare it right now to Carey Price, what he did in his first few years with Montreal, and knowing that the Canadiens were not as good of a team, but Carey Price would do the same thing that Dominic Hasek would do. And he would actually steal some games, and he would get them to win some games.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. As far as the draft goes, you mentioned earlier Matthias Samuelsson, second rounder, spent last season with the USA Hockey, where he finished with 31 points in 58 games. Second round pick that is another defenseman. The 5 of the 6 picks that they used were defensemen. One of them was a center. What were your thoughts on that? Would you say, to me, it looked like this was Phil Housley's draft just as much as it was Jason Bottrill's?
I would agree on that, and I think it was actually a smart move that we did go with 5 out of the 6 defensemen, because when we look back at what had happened the last several years under Murray, let's call it as it is. The defense, the draft, the prospect pool that we had was absolutely decimated. Right. I mean, we really didn't do anything on defense under him.
Right.
And his focus a lot of what with Dan Bielsa had done is that they had always focused on offense because they figured we'll just simply outscore people and we'll win games. But unfortunately, as everyone knows, defense is what wins championships ultimately, and that's one thing that helped Washington and Ovechkin win the cup. But I think it's a very smart move. I really do like the pick of Matthias Samuelsson. Really good IQ, good pedigree in terms of his upbringing, and I'm actually surprised that he was available at 32.
I was too.
I would have thought that he would have gone more in the top 20, top 25, and for him to fall down to 32 and for us to get him, I mean, I think that's a huge get for us.
And as much, not to interrupt you, sorry about that. As much as like you were saying with Samuelsson, all the analysts were saying that they were shocked he fell that far as well.
Yeah, and the fact that he did, I mean, I'm not sure exactly the real reasons why that happened, but let's accept it for what it is. I mean, it's a great pickup.
They need as many breaks as they can get, and we're talking about this team for about an hour and a half now, and we also forgot to mention that they were robbed of the Stanley Cup, but. Oh
yeah, 1999.
We'll just throw that out there.
Like O'Donnell, how he shows up conveniently.
You could check out my Twitter, and it's at Thomas Takeover. And one of the things that I tweeted was in regards to one of the games of the Stanley Cup Final. They had that review or whatever of the goal, and Jay McKee, who I talk to actually quite often, he's somebody that I talk to on Twitter a lot. With him being with Kitchener and stuff, I follow the OHL a lot. I went to a lot of Erie Otters games, growing up, because I have family there and stuff. And I've messaged him a time or two, and he's messaged me back sometimes, and we talk and stuff. And he tweeted about how, I think this is really something. This goal is being reviewed, and ours wasn't. And he was referring to no goal. Put a hashtag no goal, and I put, I hate Brett Hall's face, and he liked it.
Oh, yeah. And Brett Hall, I mean, anyone who's ever followed the Sabres knows that he's extremely hated for that whole thing back in '99. Same thing with McDonald, too. But,
right.
I mean, that's just
well, the thing is, too,
I'll still never forget that whole thing.
They knew it. They knew that it was bullshit. Like, it wasn't like they.
And then even better was Colin Campbell's explanation a couple of days later, was saying, "Oh well, it really wasn't a goal because there's something about the crease." But then before the next season starts, he's like, "Oh yeah, we screwed up."
Yeah, he said that they screwed it up. Yeah, he said that they screwed it up, and the whole year, teams either won or lost games based on that rule. And to kind of take that rule and just take a dump on it in the biggest moment of the season, a 5 overtime game. Was it 5 overtimes? Was it 3? I might have botched that. Was it 5? I thought it was more than that.
I know it was at least 3.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was 5.
I fell asleep watching it, honestly.
Yeah.
I fell asleep during one of the overtimes, and then I ended up waking up, and I think it was about 2:30 in the morning, and then I had seen that they had actually won the cup, and I'm like, oh my god. And then I remember later that day, and this is actually back when on WGR 550, back when the former sports host Chuck Dickerson was still on the air, and just listening to everybody complain on everything that happened with it. I mean, that was just a vent session, and everybody was irritated about it. And even now looking back, I mean, that was still probably one of the worst calls I can remember that's ever happened on this team.
In a major league, not only in a major sports league, but in a championship.
Yeah, there's no reason to botch something like that.
Right. And it was in Buffalo. It was in Buffalo. That's the worst part.
I know. And they flat out screwed it up.
Yeah, that was when they wore the white jerseys at home, which I'd like to actually see them go back to that. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
I'd be cool with that. Yeah. I mean, it's been a long time since they have, but I mean, it wouldn't be. I would definitely not be opposed to that at all.
Are you a fan of the Navy jerseys? Would you say?
Well, I own 2 of them. So
yeah, I own Navy-esque, Sabres stuff. Like the hat I'm wearing is royal blue. It's actually from the NHL Vintage series when it was like the 100-year anniversary of the NHL. The shirt I'm wearing is a Navy shirt, and it's like, let's just go back to royal blue. Can we make that happen? Can we coincide with the Bills a little bit? Like, let's go back to that because that was when they were really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's all tradition, and it kind of goes back to that. And I mean, I'd totally be fine with it.
Right. They had those jerseys with the Winter Classic. Those were sharp, but I'd just love to see them go back to the jerseys they had when they had like LaFontaine, McGillney, obviously the French Connection, like that generation. You know, they were two very separate generations, but they wore similar jerseys at those times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'd be nice to bring back a lot of that too. I mean, it all goes back to tradition because I think we've gotten away from a lot of what made this team great in terms of the actual tradition. And I think if there's ways that we can bring it back, by all means, let's bring it back and let's celebrate this team.
Right. Thank you so much, man, for joining me. This has been awesome. I gotta say,
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the invite too, and it's been great. I mean, I honestly didn't think we'd go an hour and a half.
Neither did I. We were.
But it's all good.
That's what they call. That's what they call vibing now. The kids these days, they say they're vibing.
Yeah. We get on it and we roll with it, and I mean, it's been a fun show. So I mean, definitely, I'm happy to join you, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I always say thank you for joining me, and then I ask one last question. That's how I roll on the Thomas Take Sports podcast. So I got one last question for you.
Sure, go for it.
So the likelihood that the Sabres win a Stanley Cup versus the likelihood that the Bills win a Super Bowl within the next 5 years, which would you say is greater?
I would say the Bills are closer than the Sabres right now.
Really? Oh, yeah. I mean, technically they did make the playoffs, but this is how I see it. This is how I've seen it actually in a dream of mine. Literally, not just me, daydreaming, me sound asleep in my bed, head rested against my pillow. I have witnessed it, the Sabres and the Bills winning the Stanley Cup and the Super Bowl in the same season.
Now, that would be awesome if that were to happen. I would tell you, I would love it. That'd be like total Nirvana right there, man.
That would cause so much mayhem. People might die.
I would say there would be a massive riot in the city if that were to happen.
Like that scene in Bruce Almighty.
Yeah, it would be great. I mean, to really see that happen. But I got to say, probably the Bills will be first just with the moves that they've made and the fact that now they've had a taste of playoffs. I love what they did with the draft this past spring, and now it's just a matter of seeing them get through it and really starting to build to go deeper in the playoffs. But the Sabres, I don't think, are that far behind. And I think as long as they keep doing what they've been doing, staying the course, building through the draft, and making sure that their younger players come up properly through development, I mean, I would say we're not going to be that far off. I wouldn't say playoffs this year, but it's not a stretch to say within the next year or two that we don't that they're making that call into the playoffs, because I think it's possible.
So if they don't make the playoffs this year, you said that there might be time to, if they were in the bottom 5, obviously there'd be time to reconsider their head coaching position. Do you think if they don't make the playoffs in general, do you think they should reconsider their coaching position?
I would say if it's bottom 5, absolutely consider a change at the coach. If they're more middle of the pack, and let's just say they're only outside that maybe like 5 points or somewhere around that range where it really wasn't a huge number that they missed by, then I would say look at the lines itself, look at your needs, and really go from there. If there is an actual issue at coaching, though, then I would say go ahead and address it. But I wouldn't necessarily pull the trigger in that specific instance. But if it is bottom 5, absolutely everything's on the table at that point.
That's fair. I do like the idea, though, of them both winning major championships in one season. I think that's a great dream to have.
I love it.
Buffalo would be the sports capital of the world in the NFL and NHL. How about that?
Right, absolutely. I mean, we already have that nice little hockey heaven that they want to call us, so let's make it football heaven on top of it.
It's been called hockey heaven, but wins, losses wise, it hasn't been hockey heaven yet.
Yeah, it's more like hockey hell at this point.
Right. Well, thanks, Tom. That is Tom Wujek. I'm saying your name right?
Yep.
Awesome.
You are.
Awesome. I really appreciate you joining me on the show. Definitely give this guy a follow. BHQ Media at BHQ Media on Twitter. You can join his Facebook groups. There's the Buffalo Sabres Blue and Gold Mafia, the Buffalo Sabres next wave, which talks about the next wave of talent that the Buffalo Sabres have on the way, as well as the Buttes Nation page and the definite eye-opening, attention-grabbing Key Bank Center renovation. Tom, thanks for joining me, buddy.
All right, thanks again, buddy. Great to be here.
Yeah, take care. Have a good night.
All right, you too.
Take care. Tom Wujek. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports podcast. Tune in this week. I'll have another guest on. You will enjoy it. I guarantee it. Let's go Buffalo. Sabres, Rasmus Dahlin, Matthias Samuelsson, Phil Housley is going to right the ship, in my opinion. And I think the Sabres got a realistic shot at making the playoffs in the 2018-2019 season.